Hello dear viewer, this is H.J. Armstrong, citizen, scholar, saint. I am currently writing a book where I explore the bullqueer theory of history as it pertains to American history. My ambition is to integrate bullqueer theory, traditional history, and the revelations of Q into one cohesive package. It is my hope that I will complete this project prior to the U.S. 2024 presidential elections. In the meantime, I plan to take an afternoon here and an evening there to do some humbler, but still important work here on YouTube. As an avid fan of all things true crime, I spend much of my spare time watching the fine content provided by my fellow creators. By and large, I find the community here to be a congenial and helpful bunch. However, there is one malefactor in the mix who needs to be called out for his misrepresentations of himself and his incredibly bad takes on a number of cases. I speak, of course, of Detective Ken Mains, a man who self-identifies as being world-famous. In this video, I will demonstrate the many ways in which Mr. Main has exaggerated his credentials and accomplishments. I will also show that while he bemoans what he calls influencer culture, that he has long pined for his time in the spotlight, as demonstrated by his career choices, his rhetoric about himself, and his attempts at what may charitably be called literature. Join me and let us expose this huckster once and for all. In theory, someone with real-world experience should be an excellent addition to any community. Just as my experience in business gives me lots of insight into many topics including history, so too could and should the real case work of a former detective be a helpful asset. However, despite his experience and credentials, Mains is actually a detriment to the true crime community for a number of reasons. Let us begin by analyzing the claims that he makes about his experience. This is significant since this is why he urges viewers to trust him and ignore other influencers. Mains claims to have 20 years of experience, but then clarifies that this is a cumulative total of all of the time that he spent in the Marines, as a beat cop, as a narcotics agent, and then as a cold case detective. Given that his role on YouTube is very much just doing cold cases, I fail to see how any of those previous experiences are relevant to his claims of expertise. When he was in the Marines, Mains was not an MP. That could have been indirectly useful if he had conducted or at least taken part in minor criminal investigations. However, that was not his MOS when he was a Marine. So far as I can gather, Mains was just a regular grunt infantryman. No disrespect whatsoever, but simply shooting Middle Easterners with a rifle when your sergeant orders you to is not a great example of the kind of problem-solving skills that are needed to be a good detective or cold case detective. Mains has little enough to brag about as he did not bring home any silver stars or medals of honor. He put in work in a 9-to-5 fashion, so do not let him trick you into thinking that he was the second coming of Audie Murphy. It is rather obvious that he had three basic motives for becoming a Marine. First, he tells us that he had a tendency to get himself into trouble when he was young and he wanted some discipline and adventure. Fair enough. Second, he was well aware that military service is something that most people consider honorable and would open doors for him at home. Mains claims valor nearly every time that he opens his mouth. When he mentions someone else's service, he has a tendency to humble brag about his own. Third, he wanted to benefit from the GI Bill so that he could go to college. Sadly, he is far from unique in riding the military's coattails to receive material rewards. However, there is nothing about this man which makes me think that his service was motivated primarily or secondarily by a love of country. Once he did his time with the Marines, it was time for young Ken Mains to cash in and attend college. He ended up attending Lock Haven University in Pennsylvania. By attending a private school, Hollywood Ken chose to stick the average taxpayer with a heavier bill than he would have incurred by attending a state school while at the same time clearly not putting in the time to make the most of his education. If you read his YouTube community posts or tweets, it is rather obvious that his command of grammar and spelling are extremely poor. Clearly, Lock Haven needs to hire a couple more professors in the English department to avoid being embarrassed by producing any more Ken Mains types. Mains majored in criminal justice and got his BA in that subject. Naturally, he claims this as a reason for his expertise in solving cold cases. There are some problems with that. First, Lock Haven's program has no clout whatsoever, and it is not the kind of program which provided graduates with lots of opportunities to learn cutting-edge stuff. Second, Mains graduated 20 years ago in 2003, so most of what he learned about forensics is antiquated, if he learned anything at all. His stories tend to suggest that most of what he learned about forensic science he picked up while on the job. Lastly, the criminal justice major is mostly about procedural law and very basic police work. Knowing how to calmly issue a speeding ticket to a Karen or why Miranda rights exist are both useful pieces of information for anyone in law enforcement. However, this is not likely to inspire some stroke of genius which will result in the solving of the D.B. Cooper case. Mains also lists as relevant experience that he, in his words, spent some time doing master's work. To translate from Mains' self-aggrandizing biography to plain English, he entered a master's program and then dropped out because he could not hack it. Given that a master's only requires 2 additional years to complete and is on a specialized subject for which the student should have passion, it is not an impossible mountain to climb. I rather wish that it were some impossible feat, as I am Master Armstrong and the prestige that my degree confers would be so much greater if everyone else was a quitter like Ken Mains. At some point, Hollywood Ken must have realized that knowing the nitty-gritty stuff that actually solves crime is just not all that important for making someone a star in the true crime world. Once Mains became a police officer, he had to put in time as a regular beat cop before he could apply to become a detective. This took several years. Mains counts this as experience for solving homicides, but by that logic, there are career meter maids who could fill in for Dr. Watson the next time Sherlock Holmes needs a trusty and insightful sidekick. There may be some limited insights gained by being a low-level cop, but it is still less useful for solving a case than, say, working on the case and doing research. Mains' first break as a detective came when he worked undercover to infiltrate a biker gang and do a drug bust. This is impressive work and surely does give Mains some insight into things that might matter for solving homicides. If he only started the clock of counting his experience as a detective here, would not say a word, even though technically this does not count as cold case experience. Again, as with his beat cop days, this is indirectly useful, but not directly applicable, to solving murders from 1982. It still feels a bit like he is padding his resume, although this is not nearly so egregious as him claiming his time as a Marine and beat cop. After his undercover duties were over, Mains was a full detective at long last and finally worked on cold cases. As a cold case detective, Mains was able to solve 1 or 2 cases. Most of his breakthroughs came because he revisited old cases and submitted the evidence for tests that were not possible when the cases happened. Thus, the forensics labs did all of the legwork and glory hound Mains just had the good fortune of living in the early 2010s. There were other cases Mains worked that he was not able to crack. However, after just a few years, he effectively retired. We will get into the reasons for his early departure from the force a bit later, but for now let us look at how and why he got directly into cold case investigations. As a general rule, departments allow aging detectives to work in the cold case division shortly before they retire, as it is lighter duty and less stressful because the cases do not have looming deadlines and heavy press coverage. Mains at this time still under 40 and one of the more junior detectives. If he were as dedicated to solving mysteries as he claims, then he should have spent 10 to 15 more years as a detective, alternating some of that time to working on active cases. The obvious conclusion is that Ken Mains was consigned to cold cases by his superiors because they knew that he could not handle active cases. That was a wise move to protect the public from a mediocre detective. However, although Maines has no mind for solving mysteries, he was beginning to develop a savvy for self-promotion. Using the spare time afforded him by police work with a regular schedule, Maines began his quest for clout. Let us now move on to consider his literary endeavors. In 2014, while still in the cold case division, Maines overcame his partial illiteracy to peck out 3 books. He self-published all 3 of them using createspace.org, a now-defunct self-publishing tool which allowed anyone to put up any piece of garbage they wrote for sale on Amazon. There was the option of ordering paper copies or ordering Maines' works as plays. By now, Maines was using his free time to dream of Hollywood. Based on his own description for each book, all 3 of them are written as screenplays. Hollywood Ken was eager to be discovered but as of yet, had neither the savvy nor the connections to make it a reality. None of these books gained many readers, but one of them apparently did find its way into the hands of a History Channel producer. His longest play from 2014 is called Forgotten. This title would be an accurate summation of what happened to all 3 of Maines' plays if only more than his friends and family had been aware of their existence in the first place. Hollywood Ken's only serious effort at a book-length piece, this thing is 226 pages of turgid and grossly incompetent prose. It is about a young detective and his quest to find a young woman who has gone missing. It is quite obvious that Maines was thinking of himself as the protagonist and imagining some Hollywood starlet as the damsel in distress. Maybe they would fall in love on set, the world would see the truth and beauty of Ken Maines, and he would go on to be Tom Cruise's wing mate in the next Top Gun move. Alas, this work went unheralded. As a piece of free advice for any of you who are linguistically inept, keep your writings short so that a competent person can fix them. If your ideas are good, then maybe you have a chance of going somewhere. The second Maines' works is a 44-page screenplay called Because I Could about a fictional super serial killer who commits every famous murder in the post-war era. He chose to comment on the Eddie Edwards theory posited by an FBI agent so that he could dismiss it on the grounds that Eddie Edwards was too much like his fictional killer. He then goes on to say that the idea of one person pulling off such a crime spree is implausible and absurd, but that does raise the question of why he proposed it. Either the idea is perfectly fine and he is just jealous that an actual detective put in the work to find such a killer, or else Hollywood Ken's narcissistic mind only realized how dumb the idea was when he heard someone else say it. The third and final play that Ken Maines self-published in 2014 is called Otis. In theory, it is the laziest and least ambitious of the 3. The killer and main character, Otis, is a low-profile redneck who kills because he is angered by all of the social change that he sees around him. In other words, Otis is supposed to be a rural Republican as imagined by a Democrat. Here, we see the Marxist tendencies of Ken Maines and his attempts to curry favor with Hollywood by writing something which encapsulates their values. It is this hateful little tract which shows so eloquently that Ken Maines has no real love of country and that everything that he does is simply self-serving and insincere. In 2017, Maines was contacted by Hollywood to appear as one of the 2 detectives in a History Channel show called The Hunt for the Zodiac. His literary ambitions still burned strong, but now he heard the siren song of television. Knowing that he would now be famous for his work as a detective, Maines hurriedly scribbled out a book called Unsolved No More, a cold case detective's fight for justice, which was published shortly before the show aired at the end of the year. He went to Wild Blue Press, which apparently has no copy editors. The publisher did put out an idealized, airbrushed photo to cover up his rapidly thinning hair, but they did not correct any of his caveman-level grammar. Maines went with this publisher because they had no standards, they serve anyone's agenda so long as that person is a Democrat, and they would rush his book into existence in time to cash in on his newfound fame. Both Ken and his publisher knew that there was a good chance that this fame would be fleeting, and so they wanted a quick cash grab. In the event, the book was rather crappy. Even Ken now admits that the book was not ready for prime time and that he should have worked with a better publishing house. However, the many shortcomings of the book have not prevented Maines from promoting it repeatedly over the last 6 years. He reads long sections of the book for his YouTube channel, which bears the name Unsolved No More in honor of this book. Despite its flaws, the book sold moderately well, and it served its purpose of providing a propagandistic image of Hollywood Ken for the world. He portrayed himself as a humble, small-town Pennsylvania boy who likes sports, music, cars, whiskey, and all of the other things that any decent American enjoys. Ken portrays himself as down-to-earth and grounded, someone who puts in hard work and cares deeply for the victims and their families. It is true that he does work tirelessly for the victims. At least while the cameras are rolling. Writing this book saw Ken erect a facade of being this hard-driving, talented detective who shuns self-promotion all the while engaging in shameless self-promotion. In 2017, the History Channel aired The Hunt for the Zodiac, where Maines appears alongside of another cold case expert, Sal LaBarbera. Together, they investigated the Zodiac killer from the late 1960s, and they traveled around Southern California, looked at the ciphers, and considered a few different suspects. Since the show was made, Ken has admitted that he knew nothing of the case when he accepted the job. I am floored by his dedication to the victims that he is supposedly so close to that he abandoned cases that he was working on to go on TV and feign expertise about a case that he had never thought about in his life. Even by the show's end, there is no indication that Maines' understanding of the case is any better than a random person who read the Wikipedia article and watched the 2007 movie on the topic. Despite there being two great geniuses of true crime, a veritable pairing of Holmes and Poirot, the two knuckle-draggers were unable to find a single clue, lead, or suspect over the course of several episodes. None of the latest and greatest suspects were considered. John Parr Cox, David Michael Olster, and L.D. Hill are all conspicuous by their absence, whereas well-worn names such as Arthur Lee Allen and Lawrence Kane received an excessive amount of coverage. One thing that Maines did well was to come across as likable and engaged in the case. This played well with viewers. The show itself was poorly made and a waste of time, but it has given Maines enough clout that he can now make a living occasionally making media appearances, both for news stories and on true crime shows. One case that he went on TV to discuss recently is the Idaho murders, which of course, is not a cold case. As with the Zodiac case, Maines is willing to chase clout no matter where it leads him. After the show wrapped up, Maines started his YouTube channel called Unsolved No More, where he started exploring a large variety of cases. Due to the wide variety of cases, he rarely has any real insight into most of them, and he makes, at most, 2 or 3 good points every half hour. Maines primarily talks about the importance and reliability of police reports, although he almost never bothers to pull strings and secure them so that he can share the contents with his viewers. He claims that he has reasons for acting this way, but the real reason is that he is lazy and does not wish to put in the hard work that other YouTube influencers put in. You should simply take his word for it, since he has worked cold cases and he is also a Marine. Over time, he has built a set for his show which is supposed to reflect his interests and personality. Maines tries and fails to make his set seem like a natural office that a guy might set up for himself. However, it is full of pictures of himself, features his own books prominently, and also tries to give him an everyman vibe by prominently featuring a regular bottle of Jack Daniels. Given how common Jack Daniels No. 7 is, I fail to see how it is an item of decor. He usually dresses in sleeveless t-shirts so that his large but undefined arms dominate the frame. He built his desk out of a random slab of wood in a way that I suppose is supposed to come across as manly, but really seems deeply contrived and The channel has had some up and downs, and I am ashamed to admit that I was hoodwinked by Maines for a time. I believed that he was doing a good job of covering cases until he started covering cases that I am familiar with, and I realized how full of shit he is. With the Idaho murders, I noticed that even after railing against those who chase clout, he then became the Idaho Murders News Network for a couple of weeks to rake in that sweet ad revenue. When it came to the Zodiac case, I revisited what he said on the show and I saw his stream about it, and it was only then that I realized what a fraud this man is. The only cases that Ken Maines is likely to solve are the ones where there is a trail of bloody footprints leading to the murderer himself. Even then, if the killer has the good sense to deny it, he has a 50% chance of escaping the bovine wits of Mr. Maines. Unsolved No More has become the absolute armpit of the true crime community ever since Hollywood Ken removed his comment sections. His skin is even thinner than his hair, and every comment infuriates him. It is pathetic that he sullies the good name of Marines and police officers by being such a little bitch about having people respectfully observe that he is wrong on a fact here or there, or that he needs to take a Duolingo course on the English language. During his current phase on YouTube, he penned one more book, and it appears to be the best of a bad lot by consensus. It is called The Murders of Gail and Tamara, the Cold Case Journal. The book follows Maines around as he collected evidence and pondered one of the handful of cases that he actually attempted to solve during his brief stint as a cold case detective. It is organized like a journal, and I suppose that is an admittedly clever way to cover for his innumerable misspellings, typos, and syntactical failures. Of course, the cover features Maines' full body and he is holding pictures of the victims. Once again, he is engaging in self-promotion while trying to act like Mother Teresa and to pretend that everything that he does is for the victims and their families. In conclusion, dear viewers, I urge you to steer clear of Ken Maines' YouTube channel, Unsolved No More. He is a fraud, a hack, and someone who scorns other YouTubers because he is a failed Hollywood actor who is jealous and bitter that the YouTube true crime community did not simply crown him king and bow down to his greatness. Maines will continue to clout chase, and I hope that you have the good sense to ignore his efforts while laughing at his failures. Once he fails to become the next big thing in Hollywood, he might finally give up and go back to his day job. Some people just don't have the it factor to be famous, and Ken Maines is one of those guys. He is still a year or two shy of 50, and he might have 10 or more years left during which he can be a productive beat cop. By ignoring Ken Maines' desperate and incompetent attempts at attaining fame, we can return him to his true calling and banish him to what he fears above all else, obscurity. I am H.J. Armstrong, and I am at your service. Please comment down below with any other topics you would like to see me cover.